Anybody here collect stuff? What kind of things do you like to collect? Pardon? Records. Yeah. LPs. It's so cool that they're kind of in style again. It's LPs. Yeah, Amanda. Collecting unicorns. That's cool. Okay. Collecting unicorns. Anybody else? What do you like to collect? Hockey cards. Who said that? Amen. Okay. Yes. Grandchildren. You like collecting grandchildren? I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be revenge of my own children. It's going to be so sweet. I mean, you didn't hear me say that. Yes, I could see, Bob, that grandchildren would be a good thing. Cats? I'm not touching that. That's very nice.
We got a cat from her.
You got a cat from her? Okay. Anyway, one of the things I like collecting, when I travel and go on vacation, I have to be careful when I can't do this when I'm driving, but I like collecting and taking pictures of unusual, like quirky signs and funny sayings and things like that. And it's interesting, it's just interesting what pops up on road signs and things like that. How are we doing, Matt? Is this going to work today, do you think? Hey. This is a very helpful sign. Correctional facility area, do not pick up hitchhikers. Some signs are helpful, a little quirky, but you know, generally practical. This one says, Shed Cemetery, dead end. Well, it's kind of accidental. And this sign is just not in use. So that's good. It's good. We get so much signage and advertising in our space. It's just good to know what not to look at. It's like, keep your eyes on the road, right? And of course, this is my favorite Winnipeg sign. It's this one. It's hard to explain to people what that symbol is unless you're a Winnipegger, right? And we know. What's the name of that intersection called again? Confusion Corner, right? And for good reason. Well, for the next few Sundays, we're going to be looking at signs in the Bible and signs about Jesus. A good road sign isn't a distraction, and it has some purpose, not like the sign sign not in use. But it has a purpose. And even in Confusion Corner, life can feel this way, and you're going, what the dickens is going on, and where do I go? The job of a sign is to point in the direction, not to attract attention to itself, but point to a destination, right? So, John, when he wrote his Gospels, he put in several signs in his Gospel. He was trying to explain the story about Jesus. Remember, a few weeks ago, we talked about the beginning of John, the big picture, that Jesus is a creator. He made everything, and then he became one of us so we could know the way, be in relationship with God the Father. That's the basics of the gospel, starting right from square one. But now Jesus is on earth, he's human, and he starts giving people these signs, letting them know who he really is, and revealing his identity. The first sign occurs almost inadvertently, and it's a fascinating story. I'm going to read it to you. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. That's approximately 60 to 80 liters, okay, for those of us in the metric system. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you saved the best till last." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples. There they stayed for a few days. I've always been intrigued with this story because I grew up in a household where we didn't drink alcohol. And I think, that's generally good practice. I'm not going to get into the pros and cons of that kind of a lifestyle. We all are familiar with the dangers of drinking too much. But in my tradition, when they told this story, of course it was diluted, watered down stuff. Jesus wouldn't serve the real stuff, would he? Apparently he did, according to this story. And so I was kind of intrigued about this story, and I've also done a lot of weddings. And it's fascinating what goes on behind the scenes. And I've always wondered about writing a book about the different weddings that I've done. And I was thinking about it this morning. I thought, no, it would take too many confidential okays to tell you all the stories of things that go on behind the scenes. And I was thinking about the different characters and what they would have experienced as they went through this story. What was Mary thinking? What was Jesus thinking? What were the disciples thinking? What were the servants thinking? And as I got thinking more and more about the servants, how the servants would have an interesting perspective on the story, I thought that I would interview, or that we could hear the story of one of the servants who were actually serving and working behind the scenes at that wedding. So if you give me just a second, I'll go and fetch one. Well, I thought I'd seen it all. Been there, done that, literally had the t-shirt because I've served at a lot of weddings. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And usually what happens at the front in the ceremony is what most people remember about the wedding. But because I've worked at so many weddings behind the scenes, what I remember is what goes on behind closed doors. And generally, it's more intriguing than what goes on up front. There's something about these family gatherings that heightens all the tension and ramps up all the expectations and increases all the drama. It seems like babies being born and weddings and funerals, all these relatives get together, and it's a little bit combustible sometimes, if you know what I mean. And if things don't go really smoothly, then things can get a little bit tense. But I've never been to a wedding. I've never worked at a wedding like the one I'm going to tell you about. And believe me, I thought I had seen it all. This is in Cana. And a lot of relatives are coming, the big families, everybody is related to somebody, which means you have to be really careful about what you say to your neighbor, because they're probably your cousin 2 or 3 times removed and they know someone else. So you really have to be careful when you live that closely with people, right? And at a wedding, everybody celebrates, and the whole village comes, and other people, and all the extended relations you haven't seen for years or since the last wedding, they come, they arrive. So at this wedding in Cana, things are going fairly well, but I had warned the MC, I had warned the master of ceremonies, things might be a little bit on the wine, tight on the wine, so just hold off on the toasting and revelry. We're going to try to just stretch things and make things work. Just be wise. They don't call me a steward for nothing. That means I'm managing things and in charge of things. But do you think he listened to me? Oh, sometimes. The guy who wears the white hat thinks he's the boss, thinks he knows everything, and the mistakes fall on my shoulders. Well, just as I had predicted, just as I had warned him, we started running out of wine. Now, you don't understand what a disaster this would have been. People would have talked about it for years and years and years, about how cheap my master had been, and what a skinflint he was, and what an awful ceremony it was, and what a terrible celebration, because we had run out of wine. It was so embarrassing. We wouldn't be able to show our faces in the village again for years and years and years without being the butt of jokes and snickers. Things were really tense. And then, the mother of the bride was aware of this and kind of wringing her hand, and then one of her cousins came up, a woman I'm not familiar with, and she starts whispering away to the mother of the bride, saying, "Shh, don't worry, my boy will take care of things. He's got connection, don't worry." Where do you find a supply of wine at this time of day, at this hour? Who is this person? Some kind of wine merchant or wholesaler? Who is this person? Well, I see this fairly young fellow come up, and his mother goes and talks to him and says, "They have no wine. We're out of wine." And he doesn't strike me as anything out of the ordinary, a working class guy. He's got tough hands. He must do some kind of manual labor, but he wasn't dressed in a wealthy manner or anything like that. He didn't look special at all. In fact, he sounded a little bit rude to his mom, because he said, "Woman, this isn't my problem. My time has not come. My time has not come." What is he? Some kind of debutante? Some kind of actor or performer? Or who is he? Who do you think he is? She doesn't pay him any attention. In fact, she looks directly at me. I don't want to get involved in any more family arguments. Like I said, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. She turns to me and says, "Do whatever he tells you." Well, at this point, we're out of options. And we're out of wine. So I thought, what's the worst thing that can happen? It's not my neck. It's not my problem. So this young fellow comes up to me and he says, "Okay, fill those stone containers up to the brim with water." Now, you gotta understand, these stone jars that we contain, they're pretty big. 20 to 30 gallons, probably 60, 80 of your liters. Pastor Rick explained this weird system you have for measuring volume. It's not like ours. But that's a lot of water. And it took a lot of time to fill these containers. And you have to understand that these containers we kept really special. They were holy. Almost like holy water that the religious people of the day, especially those Pharisees, judgmental jerks. Anyway, don't get me started on them. They would, when they came to an event, they would very ostentatiously wash themselves in front of everybody else, so to say, "I'm not polluted by sin, I'm okay with God." And that's not such a bad thing to do, except these fellas would flaunt it in front of everybody else and look down their noses at us, poor working guys, and it sure didn't. They just seemed to make God look really far away. But anyway, enough about those Pharisee fellows. We were supposed to fill these big stone jars with water. So we thought, we're going to wash people's hands again? It's like, we're going to ask God to do something big? Or, I don't know. I thought we had already washed our sins and got things straightened out with God, but whatever. It's not my problem. Just following instructions, so it took us a while to fill up everything to the brim. And we did. Then, this young fella says, "Okay, dip into the containers and take it to the chief guy, the head guy, the MC, the guy who's in charge of the banquet. Take it to him. And we're thinking, what's he going to do with water? Well, anyway, it's not my problem. So we dip into it. You'd never believe it. You'd never believe it. It was wine. It was wine. And we took it to the boss, and he sipped it and said, "Where have you been hiding the good stuff?" And we're going, "Oh, just saving it for a good time, my Lord." I'm thinking, phew. So we run back and dip out some more, and you know what? It was the same really good quality stuff. Lovely bouquet, just sits nicely in the tongue. Well, you have to sample it to know we're, serving the good stuff to the clients. It was amazing. Never seen anything like it. I filled those jars myself with water. And when we dipped into them and took it out, what did we get? Wine. Not just the box stuff you pick up on the discount rack. This was really primo stuff, the best possible. You wouldn't believe how good it tasted on the palate. I was so glad there was so much of it. Because that works out to about, if you do the math, about 2,000 drinks. That was a very good party. Everyone went home happy. Which is great, because all these friends, this fella who gave us the instructions, he brought along 12 very hungry and very thirsty friends, and things were getting kind of stretched, kind of thin. But there was one thing I was confused about. One thing I couldn't figure out. This young fella, and this amazing thing that happened. He's saying, "My time has not yet come." What? What does that mean? Is he some kind of a prophet? In the good book, they tell us that God helped Moses turn water into blood in Egypt. And that's kind of a judgment on Egypt. But water into wine? What does that mean? Who is this man? Water into wine. And another thing. He could have had us fill the empty wine vessels. That would be the most practical thing to do. Don't you think? Because it was already contained in the wine containers. Why did he use those special jars that were only used for holy water? I think the Pharisees were a little ticked off with him. Now, mind you, they didn't complain about the quality of the wine. They certainly didn't do that. And they managed to elbow themselves to the front of the line because they were more important than everybody else. But you know what? I think they were quietly ticked off and scandalized that we had used these jars containing the holy water. All of a sudden they became wine barrels. Well, I tell you, I've never seen anything like it in all my years. And believe me, I thought I had seen it all. But I never, ever have seen anything like that in my life. Water into wine. And ever since then, I've always wondered who that young fella is and who he's going to turn out to be. It's important for us to see the symbolism here in this story. We can easily look over it and think, what's the point in recording this miracle? Nobody was sick. Nobody was threatened with death, although it might have been death of embarrassment perhaps in front of the neighbors. Why did Jesus even bother? Like he told his mother, "My time has not yet come. Mom, this really isn't our deal. This really isn't our problem." Mary graciously, humbly, kind of puts Jesus on the spot and says, she in fact kind of tactfully ignores Jesus' refusal and turns to the servants and says, "Do whatever he tells you," right? Because she has faith. She knows he's something special. She knows something will happen when he steps into action. But the key, I think, is the vessel that Jesus uses to turn the water into wine. He's trying to demonstrate in a sign that it's a new day. There's a new sheriff in town. Something new is breaking in on planet Earth. And instead of ceremonially washing yourself and trying to use outward ways of getting God's approval, basically what I call religion, instead of man-made effort to be right with God, Jesus is breaking in and he's saying, I'm doing something new. And wine in the Bible was a symbol of blessing. So instead of a curse, wine being turned into blood is a curse back in the days of Moses, warning Egypt to let the Israelites go. This water into wine was a sign of blessing, and it was a harbinger, a warning, an alert to what was going to be coming. What Jesus was all about. He was bringing something new. He was bringing in what Canadian author Bruxy Cavey calls the end of religion. The end of religion. The end of man's attempt to justify himself with God. And he was bringing in something new. Because Jesus was saying that in him was life and joy and peace and healing and reconciliation with the Creator. That's what he was proclaiming. And he did it very powerfully, not in a flashy way. And the scripture says that the disciples saw it and they believed. The disciples saw it and they said, this is what Jesus was all about. His disciples believed in him. So he's doing it as a demonstration. Even though in one sense it wasn't his initial formal proclamation of self-identification as the Messiah, the chosen one, he was saying, I am going to be doing something new in Israel. And the old system of trying to make yourself right with God based on human self-effort was done. It had failed. And now Jesus has the power to change us from the inside out. And that was the first sign of his coming. Just the beginning of the road. He's going to get more and more and more clear as he goes along. But sometimes when you start a journey, on the way to your destination, the first road sign you see is, okay, head that way instead of that way. And then as the directions get more and more specific as you progress in your journey. And that's what we see as we go through John. But this is the first sign. There's something, too, about the way in which the sign happens, the setting for this story. Because it's involved in a part of everyday life, a celebration of marriage. It also hints at the marriage. Jesus is described in the New Testament as the bridegroom. We are his bride. There's something about weddings that Jesus likes and he blesses with his presence. And so he was there just as part of human existence. And when the wedding threatened to bomb, to be a memorable disaster, he comes through with undeserved grace. Whether it was poor planning or circumstances or whatever happened, this party was headed for disaster, and Jesus intervened. Now, would people have survived not having really good wine for the rest of the party? Of course. Of course. But I think that the very fact that it was the quality of the wine and the quantity of the wine, Jesus wanted to demonstrate to people God's grace isn't cheap. It's not stingy. It's not, okay, well, we have to kind of ration out grace because there's X number of people here today, and we divide it by a limited bit of grace, and make sure you take more grace than your neighbor because you need to share. This is the kind of unlimited buffet of God's grace, His love and acceptance that is available for all of us. And that's what Jesus was trying to communicate in this miracle. Would they actually have needed 2,000 servings of wine at that party? Probably not. Probably not. And I'm sure there was stuff left over. But Jesus' point in supplying that abundant supply was to demonstrate the love and provision and power of God, of the Creator, and how He feels about us. The other signs that we're going to examine in John's Gospel are a little more dramatic and a little more focused. But just this first starter just gives you an idea of how Jesus wants to intervene in everyday human life. And there's something about this man, something so intriguing, he's definitely worth investigating. And more than just investigating, he's definitely worth following. Let's pray. Father, thank you that you show up at weddings. And thank you for the story of Jesus. Lord, I pray that you would fill us. I pray that you would turn water into wine in our lives. Because we need your power, your provision, your presence, your grace with us. Lord, some of us are really looking to you. We need you to show up in our lives. So I pray you do the same thing. As we kind of fill up our vessels and get ready for you to act, I pray that you would somehow do something with the little bit that we have to offer and multiply it and meet us at our point of need. Lord, I pray your blessing on this church, that we would be a place for people to experience grace and truth, and that you would help us to understand and implement a gospel culture here at Elim Chapel. Not just a belief in the content of the gospel, but a gospel culture. Give us grace and truth as we live it out. In Jesus'